In this session, we'll be diving into how clinical research industry must use insights from the past to better prepare our AI models and technologies to meet the needs of patients today and in the future. Our panelists will explore the critical role that collaboration between technologists and clinical scientists plays in helping to reduce bias in our AI models. Please note that we'll have time for Q&As at the end of the session. So let me introduce our panel. The session will be moderated by our very own Andrea Bastek from Florence Healthcare. She'll be in discussion with Lisa Moneymaker from Medidata, Noelle Gaskill from Tempus AI, and Del Smith from Acclinate. Join me, well, my script says join me in welcoming to the stage, but they were eager, so just applaud anyway.
Thank you. And thanks to everybody who moved up to the front of the room. I'm super excited to be here today. This is a very nerdy panel of very smart people, and I'm honored to be moderating. So thank you all for joining me. So today we're talking about future-proofing clinical trials with AI data and new rules. And I want to start off by a show of hands from the audience. We can see you all. Have you started using AI at work? Yes? Yes. Amazing. Okay. Well, you're in the right room. Super. That is great. So I'm going to ask each of the panelists first, when we say future proofing, when you hear the word future proofing, what does that mean for you in your work?
Okay, I can start. For me and where I work, so I should give some context to that. At Tempus AI, I run our clinical research network we call Time. That has 100 sites, 4 million patients, and we predominantly use AI to be able to surface the patients to enroll them onto the clinical trial and help the sites enroll into the clinical trial. So when I talk about future proofing, it's really in that context, right? So we already see this inertia in my world, but I think future proofing is really about painting that holistic picture of that specific patient and what is their journey going to be in oncology. And yes, that might be very much inclusive of clinical research. And to elaborate, what I would say is that, some patients are hyper responders, some don't respond at all. Even if they have that specific alteration that we want to target, can we know this patient at a deeper level? And so when you start to bring together the science, that specific patient's perspective, but also the wealth of data that we'll talk a lot about on the stage today, can we be better at putting in front of the provider at the right time what options make the most sense for that specific patient? And we've been talking about precision medicine for a very long time in this room and in these meetings. So I almost hesitate to say that, but I think that's the future proofing that we're doing, is really getting to that patient-specific precision medicine.
Yeah, really interesting there to think about the whole patient care journey, not just the clinical trial. A lot of times we just get caught up talking about the trial specifically, right? So
Mhm.
thanks for that perspective, Noelle. How about you, Lisa?
So reminder, I'm from Medidata. If you saw Anthony's talk this morning, we cover a really significant breadth of sort of product offerings within clinical development. So I think from a future proofing, it's been an exciting adventure over the course of the last few years. We've had AI within our products for the last over a decade, but the acceleration in what's possible, and not only that, what pharma and CRO and sites themselves are expecting is accelerating really rapidly. So I'm not sure if there is such a thing as future proofing at this point. What we're trying to do is make sure that we are standing as far on the cutting edge as possible of where our customers, the ones who are responsible for driving these trials, are trying to either reduce cost, find time efficiencies, or look for new ways that we can interact within data. And so that can be a few different things. It can be finding new ways to surface insights within the data. So we hold, as Anthony said this morning, 36,000 historic trials and the data within them. That gives us a really interesting ability to look for benchmarking, to look for performance metrics, to look for different ways that studies stack up against one another. So that's an example. Ways that we can augment workflows. So the sorts of things you do every day. If you're thinking about starting up a trial, the systems and the operationalization that goes into getting those trials up and running on particular software systems, we can make that go a lot faster with new tools that are available. And then are there other tools that we can use to make it so that you can take the sort of the rote burden off of some of the the activities that you need to do so that your individuals can be spending more time on high value things. But some of the more interesting things we talked a bit this morning about interoperability are different ways that, just within the last, 6 to 9 months, it's really evolved of ways that we can have different systems talking to one another using things like agents as opposed to some of the more brittle integrations that we were talking about this morning. So I think being cutting edge for us means marrying a deep understanding of what it takes to run clinical trials with people who live and breathe every day thinking about the new evolution of what AI can bring, and then looking for those crossover opportunities where we can solve a problem that we weren't able to solve even 3 months ago.
That's awesome. And is anyone else surprised to hear 10 years of AI being in metadata tools? That's a pretty cool statistic. And in other words, you guys are already future proofing by having it under the hood when people didn't even realize.
Exactly.
Yeah, very cool. Del.
Dale Smith, co-founder and CEO of Acclinate. We specialize in accessing, engaging, and mobilizing hard-to-reach communities and communities of color around clinical trial participation. And we do that through a unique, what we call touch plus tech approach. On the touch side, we have a community of about 180,000 underrepresented community members across the United States that we have sustained engagement with around their health. But then we are able to take that increased trust and that data from that to be able to make predictions as to when is someone ready and how do we reach and engage with someone around their willingness to be part of clinical trial participation. When I think about future proofing, it still kind of baffles me that recruitment is such still a random objective measure. And what we are thinking about is the ability to be able to take not just the protocol and the inclusion exclusion criteria and your sites and your geographic locations and census and epidemiology data, but then also a critical factor, which is someone's willingness to participate. And if you throw that all kind of into a pot and you mix that up, what we believe you should be able to pull out is a pretty significant prediction as to the number of people who will be able to enroll in your trial, particularly around more common indications. And right now, as many of you know, clinical trial recruitment just seems to be very much like a Wild Wild West, and they're just trying to spin the wheel faster and faster in different places to get to the outcome they're looking for. So that's what I think about when I think about future proofing.
For sure. And earlier, I can't remember, it was Andy or Anthony who was mentioning all the new companies that are popping up, and I feel like 80% of them are in recruitment, right? It is a crazy frontier and a big problem we need to solve. So cool. But I love that, using data to help predict, right? To make better decisions, not just looking back, but looking forward. Very cool. Well, that transitions us nicely into when I think about the industry, and I think when most of us think about it, we have so much data, right? We were talking about it this morning, all the data that all the companies are sitting on, whether they're sites, vendors, sponsors. So we think about that sometimes as old data, right? And it's kind of curious now that AI is unlocking different things we can do with that quote unquote old data. So I want to ask each of you guys, and then, by the way, Dr. Califf mentioned all the commercial data that's out there, right? I mean, American Express knows more about my life than my mom, for sure, right? So when we think about that old data that we're all sitting on, plus commercial data that's out there, what are the new uses that we can drive forward?
Well, yeah, I'll throw out one interesting use case for us. So we've been around for about 5.5 years, and we use a lot of qualitative data and qualitative insights when we're engaging. So, for example, we're in 17 metro areas of the United States, and we always have video crews out there whenever we're in the communities, and we're capturing videos. And so we had about 5 years worth of just terabytes of video data that we were thinking, well, this is nice to use as a marketing techniques from time to time. But we then found that we had a great AI tool that will allow us to go in and basically pull out insights out of those videos that we had. And so, for example, we said, what does the African American community think about lupus and how to engage around lupus and whether they even want to be part of a clinical trial. And we would have, probably 60 or 70 lupus videos out there that we capture from people talking about lupus, or just talking about their health condition that they happen to just talk about lupus that they had or a friend had. And so the AI was able to go in there and pull that out and basically put that in a format and said, here's your report of what people's sentiments are around lupus based upon those interviews. And so it was like data that we had that we didn't realize. It was like a gold mine that hardly anybody had that we were able to pull out.
Great. And probably 9 months ago would not have been able to do that with same analysis, right?
We were just paying for the space.
Yeah, I must say. Lisa.
Yeah. So when we think about sort of the troves of data that are out there, I think one of the paradigms that we've been looking at this with is the idea of what can we create virtual twins of? So oftentimes when you think of a virtual twin, you're thinking of, another me. And we've certainly done that. And I'm going to park a topic here that we'll probably come to later that Dell and I have both spoken passionately about, which is like bias and representation. So it's like park that there for a second and come back to it. Um, but the idea that, we can take representative patient data and be able to create a synthetic arm of patients based on that we have algorithms that allow us to say I can take a model of a person and make another person that has clinically relevant data that's associated with it. But we sort of didn't stop there because we said, what are other things that you could create virtual twins of? And so we've looked at treatment arms, and we've looked at virtual twins of studies. So with that same amount of data, and if you look historically, it's been a passion area of ours to say, could we help trials run better by creating a virtual twin of the entire trial and being able to run that in advance? So why do we go into every trial and say, well, we hope this works, and not just is the drug going to be good, but we hope this operationally succeeds. Could we run those in advance? Can we predict where the patient populations will be? Will we be able to hit those enrollment curves? Can we get ahead of some of the operational issues that will cause problems based on the procedures that you're trying to conduct and the costs that are associated with it? So I think when we think about all the different ways we can model out old data into new, it gives us some really exciting areas that we can play with.
Awesome. Yeah. How about you, Noelle?
Yeah, I would build a lot of what Lisa said in that, to take it a little bit further into my world, we do a lot of genomics at Tempus for those who aren't aware, and of course, oncology specific. So we even look at the images of old IHC slides. So we just recently acquired a company called Page that has a huge data asset around that, but also ability to, again, with a simple image of a patient, a slide of tissue, be able to understand if there's the potential signal within that tissue. And if you're in oncology, tissue is the issue. So I think about how we wouldn't have thought anything of an old IHC slide in clinical research and oncology, even more recently. But now that could be paired into, the ability to say, okay, now I think we need to do a confirmatory test. It might be for an alteration that there isn't commercial drug for, but we think we see something within that tissue. And that is actually an alteration that a clinical trial is available for. So bringing again, that patient picture together and making the best decisions around patients really does involve this old data. And before, as a clinical research coordinator, I would have looked at an ICD-10 code and I would have looked at the prior visit. That's probably about all I manually could get through in a day. And now when we're able to do this across, millions of patients expansively, and then find patterns that inform patient care, not only from the data, but also from the images, this really starts to evolve clinical research because maybe only the patients who should be on the trial are getting on the trial. And we know that in advance.
That's awesome. Yeah, a couple points we touched on there that we will come back to. Definitely representation for sure. But something else too I wanted to touch on there is sort of the way that we can use the data that we have. And in the past, there was always this sort of hurdle of, is the data structured, right? So where is it living? Who owns it? Do we have access to it? And then is it structured? And I was fascinated when chatting with you guys preparing just how that barrier has been removed. So I'd love to, I think your examples were good, but if anyone has anything to add there about sort of the removal of unstructured or the access to unstructured data.
I can start.
Yeah.
Again, I just feel for our data coordinators in the room, data managers, coordinators. So much of your time is taken up with looking at an EHR, dumping that into an EDC system in a structured way, and then having somebody, physically, in most cases, come and confirm that data with you is just the pain of clinical research, right? And so I know Lisa probably knows that in many different capacities as well in her world, but if that's where we're starting from, I think about the world of now unstructured data is accessible and how we can start evolve away from those processes and honestly that time waste that we have in clinical research. For those who are not aware, inputting data into an EDC system or wherever else it's required within a clinical research site absolutely impacts enrollment. You can get behind on data. You have an FDA inspection, and the community-based practices in particular will halt what they're doing. I've had phase 1 centers halt because they're so succumbed with the data efforts. And so now if we think about a world where we can get to unstructured data, we can analyze that, qualify it, and it's removing a lot of that people power that we've relied on historically. I think honestly, this is such a huge evolution for clinical research in the future.
Yeah, I was talking to my nephew who was like 8 years old, and he was on the phone. I was trying to talk to him. I said, "Hang up the phone," and he's like, "Why did you say hang up the phone?" And I was like, he's like, "Why did you just say in the call?" And I was sitting there thinking about like where hang up the phone comes from. For those that know, like when you have the rotary phone and you would hang the phone up. And I bring that up to you because I think at some point in the future, this whole conversation about structured versus unstructured data is going to be very similar. Like, what do you mean structured versus unstructured? And then, the example is that with the videos that I gave. I mean, at some point, we knew we had these videos, and we hired someone to say, watch the video, and then put codes and associate it and themes. And now, of course, the system we upload the videos and then it spits out all this information that we want. So I think this whole concept of is it structured, is it unstructured, at some point will be a thing of the past. And any data or any data point will be able to make intelligent decisions from that, whether in whatever format it's in.
Yeah, and Lisa, before you go, I was going to call back to something Anthony said this morning, right, where he said AI is useless if it's sitting on a mess. So I'm curious how that ties into this structured versus unstructured.
Yeah, I mean, it's an evolution, right? I think of all the time that we've spent in the past. I said 10 years, you echoed 10 years. Like that amount of time, you used to have the data, had to have the data in a highly standardized way to be able to run specific algorithms over it. And so we had, of all of the data coming in, because like, oh my goodness, rave data can be really messy when it comes in. I don't know if you knew that. The the teams that would be involved in standardizing that so that we could take algorithms and run it and create really interesting outputs. But we're already seeing ways in which that's no longer necessary, where you can have large language models interacting with data in less structured ways that are able to either create structure out of it so you can still use those existing algorithms, or be able to find insights within it that don't require structure at all. And I think, harkening back to this morning again, it's the same idea that we used to have even for API to API conversations. It was, here's your piece of data that's going to go to this piece of data. And that creates, yes, like very predictable, but very fragile. So one person changes one thing and now everything breaks down. Whereas now we can ask things of one another in more natural language that the agents are able to, sort of decompose using those same models. And now we can be a lot free form about what we're asking one another and still get meaningful results that could be decomposed. So yeah, the sorts of algorithms that are becoming available now allow you to be a lot messier and are allowing us to evolve to a world like Dell's talking about. I think there's a journey to get there, and there's a journey that means that pieces of that are still relevant even as we go. But I think it creates a really exciting accessibility to the way that we can solve some of these interoperability challenges like we're talking about.
Sure, and all the new products, right? Even if it's not data, but even thinking about the way that these new recruitment tools are interacting with patients directly in a sort of conversational way that people can feel confident about rather than scared about, right? So, yeah, super interesting. Thank you guys. All right, well, we're gonna get back to that thing we put on the side later in the parking lot. Yeah, we're gonna take that back. We're gonna talk about data and how this impacts or can impact inclusivity and engagement, right? So we all know that we have a lot of historical data. The models are trained on that data. It may not be the most representative data, and I think that's something we have to be careful of, right? How are the models trained, and how do we make sure that they're not biased, right? How do we counteract that bias? So I'm curious, your guys' first takes on that.
Well, I'll talk about our experience at Acclinate. We have a patent on clinical trial participation that looks at how someone engages around their health to make predictions as to whether they'd be willing to take part in a clinical trial. And when we kind of came up with our theoretical or conceptual model of that, we said, okay, we clearly got to go and find data to try to validate some of this. And so we look for data on people who had completed a clinical trial or taken part in a clinical trial. And as you can imagine, when we looked at that data, we said, well, obviously people who take part in clinical trials are white males that live in certain socioeconomic zip codes close to academic medical centers. And our team said, that doesn't help us out at all. And so we had to then think about, what do we do? And so, I mean, we kind of had to take an approach of really not looking at any existing data, almost coming in as if like, all right, if we were thinking about this conceptually, how do we go and now gather the top proper data? And we oversampled in the areas, right? Because we knew we wanted to focus on underrepresented communities, communities of color. There wasn't a lot of data out there already for that. And so we just had to kind of take an approach of like, we've got to go and get the primary data ourselves in order to train on it. And I say that because I think a lot of people are tapping into existing data sources. And as we all know, those existing data sources already have their elements of bias. So all of a sudden I come to you with a solution that says, hey, I have a way of finding people who to be part of clinical trials. And I train my data off of all the existing data out there around all the, 46,000 clinical trials that are taking place. We're just kind of exasperating the issue at that point in time. And I think it takes us to recognize that while we may not have to worry about structured, unstructured data as much, we still have to worry about like, where did the data come from? And are there biases in that data already?
And just
No, go ahead.
I was just going to ask Stella a quick question. Like, how do you test that, right? Because I think one thing that people don't necessarily think about is like, well, how do I know if it's right or wrong or representative or not representative? And sometimes I remember I was talking to someone who said, well, it took me a month to get the model to make a mistake. So it's a long time of figuring out if there's a problem, right? How did you guys tackle that?
Yeah, I mean, we kind of use some basic statistical mechanisms, right? Instead of just having the AI just kind of go and run all the analysis and give the results, we kind of went back, frankly, to saying, all right, let's do basic statistics. Let's take some of the data that we have, let's split it in half, and let's be able to kind of use half this data to be able to come up with our algorithm and our equation and our beta weights and our predictions, and let's use the other half of the data to be able to to see how well the data fits the model, right? Some basic statistical things. And we had to do that over and over and over again. And the challenge for us is that we didn't have a lot of data, so it was slow in the process. When you have thousands and thousands of data points, you can do that. But every time we have to split a data point up in order to do a model fitting, it only just kind of slowed things down. So, but that was the type of approach that we had to take in order to be able to validate that we had something that had a high degree of confidence and the predictive ability.
So, Lisa, sorry I interrupted.
Oh no, you're good. It was a great follow-up question. I think about this in a few different ways. I mean, I'll do a little show of hands real quick. How many of you know that our trials in the past were less representative than we would like them to be today from a gender, socioeconomic, racial, right? It's pretty much everybody here. I think it's common knowledge. If you asked your neighbor down the street, do you think they would know that same thing? They don't have the same history. We are in a just melting within it. We know it, it's a part of our DNA. So the thing that gets me a little bit nervous that I think we have to watch out for as an industry is AI has lowered the barrier of entry for software companies to get into our space. This is exciting, and we know all the reasons it's exciting. Anthony was mentioning some this morning. It sparks innovation. There's new and exciting tools that we can use. But, when you think about some of the ways that we go through procurement, we ask questions about what do the companies know about data privacy? We ask them, what do you know about validation and sort of the ins and outs of what it means to bring software into this particular industry. We don't ask today, are the models that you're, building today, are those controlling for bias if they have anything to do with, patient population predictions, things like that. I think we need to make sure that we are including vendors in this community and educating them on what this means and what this takes, because there are ways to adjust for bias. There are ways to check for it, as Del was indicating, but only if you think to ask or if they know to look. And if they don't know to look, I think that's a risk. There's also the idea that there is data that we just didn't collect in the past. And so we can't even know. The idea of SOGI, sexual orientation and gender identity, has only become a mode of data collection recently. And so when we think about looking retrospectively on data sets and how might a future drug be predicted to react based on historic data that we have, we're blind to it. There are populations we can't even see within the data. And so I think these are things that we need to be aware of when we think of our data collection modalities, when we think about what we want to be able to do within the future to make sure we're collecting enough and that we're putting in place the right methodologies and the right consciousness of the data that's within there to make sure that we don't propagate old mistakes.
It's awesome. How about you, Noelle?
Sure. Yeah. I think some tactical of how we do this in the identification of patients for clinical trial is that we're very keen on the data set that we're looking for patients. So if you're looking at past clinical trial enrollment, as we've acknowledged, you might be completely missing a representative patient population. But if you're looking at the EHR within the practices that have all patients coming in, particularly within the community, hopefully it's a better way of starting the algorithm of finding every patient. So we really take a no patient left behind approach, meaning that when we do build an algorithm for a clinical trial, we do a search within a manual search with our nursing team to say, did we surface the same patients that this algorithm surfaced, to make sure that there isn't bias within the agent, and that if we see anything that's a disconnect, usually it's because if anything, we've probably hyper screened out patients that could have been eligible. We adjust the algorithm accordingly. We just did a paper on something that we call patient query, and our algorithms really focus on actually removing patients from the overall patient population that we want to search for with nurses. So what I mean by that is we don't leave it all up to AI. We don't have them searching all the way down into the inclusion-exclusion criteria so specific that we miss a bunch of patients because of incomplete data, because they haven't been coming into the practices as much. So hopefully, again, removing some of that bias in the data, but actually just our agents focus on removing patients we know are not eligible at the high level. So if you're looking for a non-small cell, we have people, the other indications are being removed to oversimplify it. And then the rest of the patient population, we leave up to nurses to start to dive into the patients. So again, we have a more no patient left behind model, not so much let's find the 4 patients that the agent says are perfect. We rather have more patients that we're looking at with our nurses than hyper screening the patients out who may have been eligible. And what I like to think about in this model, and we're looking at the data, and hopefully we'll publish this soon, is that within the community-based practices, and again, using that EHR level data as the starting point, we actually might be surfacing patients who never would have been approached for a clinical trial. As they are being seen at that clinic, but maybe they don't have the rapport with the provider. Maybe there wasn't trust with the provider. Maybe for whatever reason, they weren't approached for the clinical trial at the site in the past, but now the data can find them. And really focusing our efforts in that trajectory and making sure that all patients from the community are hopefully being surfaced if they're potentially eligible for a trial.
Well, it takes some fine tuning there, right? So it's like, maybe you can run an Epic query and it gives you 3,000 patients. You don't want that, but you also don't want the algorithm to be so specific that it's only giving you the 4 perfect patients, right? How do you guys work on that fine tuning?
It's still, it's basically 2 things. One, you build the algorithm, and then you can run, an agent against that to say, double check, did we actually get every patient that should have qualified because you understand your data set? The other way we do it is with people power, because I truly believe in clinical research and oncology clinical research. Nothing is going to replace a nurse who understands the space in their patient population. And so we always want to complement it with that expertise. It's not that nurses can screen 4 million patients, but can we get, again, the majority who don't qualify at the high level out of their screening workflow, and then let's make sure that every patient that they found is what that algorithm found. That's how we launch our algorithms, and then we come back and we test them on occasion to make sure, again, we have this no patient left behind effort. I would still say this is not perfect, and it's one of the risks in using, agents and searching for patients, because you have data and data is not perfect. But we try to complement that as much as possible with the experts in the field.
Yeah, makes sense. I heard a great quote recently. It said, the person said, computers love to do grunt work. And I think that's right. Like, let them do the grunt work. Let your humans who are very smart do the smart work, right? Yeah, it's perfect. Thanks, guys. Well, looking ahead, well, actually, let's talk first about sort of promise and pushback. So I think the more we talk about AI, and it's everywhere, it's on every. I loved Steve Wimmer's post recently. He said it's AI is on every single banner at every single booth at every single meeting he's at. So we're hearing a lot about it. We see the promise. We have great use case examples, right? But we're also starting to see pushback. So I want to hear a little bit about what you guys have experienced, and I can share some of what I've heard too.
Yeah, I'll talk about it from a sponsor standpoint. I mean, right now we're engaged with about 8 of the top 10 sponsors, bless you, and some medium-sized sponsors. And we've got a few sponsors, and our team knows it. Like, do not put anything that looks like or says AI on a proposal response that goes across, because it introduces a whole new set of scrutiny and criteria. And not that we're not being truthful and transparent, but sometimes we can say we have a predictive model. We have a predictive analytics model, right? And it just like literally the word AI will take you 4 more months of qualifications or 4 more months of risk assessments to do it. And so it's interesting to see that some sponsors, not the case. They actually want to lean in, and that's almost like the opposite. They want to know, like, what are you doing with AI that would help us become more efficient? So it's a case by case basis. You see, there's some different posturing with things, but I think there's still some concerns. And to Lisa's point, until we as an industry get to a point where we're thinking about governance and bias and our data, I think until we get to that point, I can see why some sponsors are taking a more cautious approach to introducing it into the organization.
Yeah, I would say we're seeing a breakdown pretty cleanly across maybe size of organization. Large sponsor, large CRO, really leaning in. They have their own AI programs. They're excited to see what we're doing. Mid market, a little bit more hesitant, mainly because they haven't been able to put the resources necessarily behind what does this mean for them? What do they want their posture to be? So they're, dipping toes in the water, but less full embracing. But what I've started to see over the last 9 months, if we want to align it to the conversation that Catherine was having this morning, with the uncertainty, I think, in the administration from a U.S. perspective this year, this has caused a ripple out into the rest of the world. And what we are starting to see, which I hope does not persist, is a divergence of regulatory, both from an AI perspective, a data privacy perspective, et cetera, that is starting to pick up country by country or region by region. And I think this is going to have a dramatically uh, ice water effect on the potential of innovation. Because if you think about this idea, so some of the things we're seeing is, whereas in the past, there's been a pretty clear unification of regulation, like little changes region by region. For the most part, if you conducted your studies well, you could market your drugs in the vast majority of countries, right? If we start to see regulatory agencies diverge, if we see a divergence of privacy policies, we will have systems that will only be able to run in specific countries. We won't be able to run algorithms on aggregations of data because there will be data residency challenges. We're seeing a divergence of consent requirements across different countries of whether or not you're able to use data for secondary purposes depending on the language of the particular consent when it comes to AI. I think any of those things done in a uniform way, the industry can adapt to. But if every country is taking a divergent approach, it's really going to throw ice water on this in a way that I think is going to bring a lot of the potential innovation to a halt. So I think that's one of the pieces that I think is challenging and starting to give the organizations that have really spent the last year building this up, 2 years building up, embracing, kind of getting ready with their programs, going, oh, shoot, because those are all global organizations who need to operate in all of those different countries.
Sure, and that just introduces so much more risk, right? Now you have to control for all of these individual country factors that you probably didn't build into your plan.
That's
Right.
exactly right.
Yeah, that's fascinating. How about you, Noelle?
Sure. I'd like to, again, answer more in the tactical sense. If you're a clinical research site and you're being told by a sponsor, can't use AI at all, you have to interrogate that. The world is, you guys just all raised your hands pretty much, the world is using AI. I can understand where they want to protect themselves from their protocol being loaded into ChatGPT on your phone. Like, sure, that makes sense. Maybe it's a confidentiality concern that they have, right? So you can build language around that and you can make sure that they get comfortable with how you're using AI, but how you're not using AI or exposing them to risk. So we have this conversation all day long, like you said, lovely procurement conversations around how we use AI. And we have to show like this is a protected environment. This is how we're doing things, and I think that's reasonable. But I would say that these same companies are searching for AI answers. So I wouldn't take the concern around AI being a barrier. I think maybe a conversation again to understand what is it that that particular person is trying to protect themselves of or assess risk around. But the reality is that AI is in clinical research, should be in clinical research, and it's a way of doing it so that we are respectful of the confidentiality and the nature of these clinical trials that we're working on and the patients that it might be identifying in my case. But it's not that I think the industry is saying no to AI. And if they are taking that stance, if the individual that you're working with is taking that stance, I would ask for more questions and escalate it.
I think that's a great point, and thanks for taking us down to that tactical level. Those were some of the examples I was going to share too, right? Where CRAs are the ones that are like, well, wait a minute. I'm noticing that my sites are using, a AI note taker on a call that we didn't approve. And I'm the one who's having to say, this is not okay, right? So it's a little bit the Wild West, I think. And I feel like, the pendulum swing for sponsors to put that out there is CRAs saying, hey, we don't even know what our sites are doing, right? They're not even telling us if they're putting our protocol in ChatGPT. So I think there's a common ground there that we have to get to. And I would say, having SOPs around AI usage, especially at a site level, and making sure your staff are trained on that is a really good way to combat that sponsor saying no AI. Well, oh, here's how we use it, and here's how all our staff are trained on it, right? That gives you some starting point and some sort of compliance ground to stand on. So yeah, great. Awesome. Well, we're getting close to the end, so thanks for hanging with us. We're going to have time for a few questions at the end, but first I want to ask our panelists just sort of like agentic AI and collaboration. What does the next wave look like? And Lisa, I'm going to quote you here for a second. Lisa said, it was like 2023 was the year of AI, 2024 is the year of generative AI, 2025 is the year of agentic AI. So what's next?
What's next after agentic? I mean, if anybody knows the answer, let's go place some bets right now. No, but I think from an agentic standpoint, we are seeing this. Number one, if you haven't played around with agentic AI, it's pretty fun and it's pretty fast to deploy. And the exciting thing about that is, AI can be incredibly costly to develop and deploy. Some of the agentic frameworks that are out there are quite easy to deploy, to work with, and to hook into your existing environments. So I think what agentic's really going to give us is the ability to have that, we were talking this morning, co-pilot, have that helper that sits with you to help you accelerate some of the workflows you're working on. And I think this is something, especially for sites where pending all of the same concerns that we were just talking about with Noelle, give them the ability to do things and not have to wait for a sponsor or a CRO to bring tech to them. It's something that they can help out with in their own workflows. But I think it's a really exciting capability that allows you to accelerate things you are already doing, but have it happen in a more autonomous way, have it happen in a guided way. And I think we're going to see a real acceleration of what that means in terms of how AI can help us get things done in a faster and more efficient way.
Great. Yeah, Deb.
Yeah, I like analogies, by the way. So I'm going to give you a quick analogy, then kind of lead into kind of our practical application of this. So double-sided marketplaces. Our company is really a double-sided marketplace, but I'll talk about like Uber or Lyft, which I'm sure everybody here is aware of. They operate in these double-sided marketplaces. You as the driver, you need to get to some place, and then someone who's trying to make money getting passengers around. So if you think about this from a agentic standpoint, I mean, every time I land and I go, I'm like, which type of ride do I want? Am I there on vacation for my family? And so I don't want to do Uber Black, right? Because I got to pay for it out of pocket, right? Getting to a point where I have an agent that knows, when I'm coming in, what type of ride I want, what the conditions are, that when it goes out to find a driver, it's acting on my behalf, right? And then you think about it from the other side of a driver who's like, I don't want to pick up people that are drunk, or have a history of it, all these things. And so when that person's getting rides, they have an agent that's out there trying to find. So now you have these two agents, a passenger agent and a driver agent that's talking to each other, that know the preferences of each other to be able to get to a more ideal outcome. And I bring that up to you because we're doing something similar in our company. We have a community of 180,000 people. We've got all this data, and we have all these people in our community. And so we've essentially kind of created an agent for our community that works on behalf of what's in the best interest of our community. And of course, we deal with sponsors. sponsors, and sponsors want certain things. They want to operate certain ways. They want certain data. And so we've essentially, on our sponsor side, created this agent. And so within our company, we have our community agents talking to our quote unquote sponsor agent and ensuring. And so there's safeguards. Like our community agent says, like, listen, we're not going to take part in phase 1 studies. That's not what we do, right? We're not going to drive more than 50 miles to a study site. That's not what we're going to do. And so when we have a client that has a protocol and we feed that protocol and the criteria into our agent, it's not trying to go and talk to someone who's outside of that radius who wants to be part of a phase 1 study. It already knows. And so I think that becomes really interesting, not just company to company agents, but even within company agents gets to be really, really interesting. So that's kind of some of the ways we're using it currently.
That's cool. I want the Uber agent that says, my trunk is full. I do not want to pick up someone at the airport because that's the most frustrating thing, isn't it?
Very much.
How about you, Noelle?
I would say that what's coming is that everyone is using it. We're talking about it. It is kind of like a novelty, but I hope clinical research practices in particular are getting comfortable with agents and building agents and using it in that co-pilot setting. I think is the perfect way to frame it. Study startup, right? Like, where is it? What was the last thing that happened? You quickly can build an agent to help you with that. And then you're cutting down so much of that waste of time in your practice. And then that just has so much potential across everything that we're doing. So I hope that, yes, AI is powering our clinical research in every aspect and everyone's comfortable with it.
Super. Thank you, guys. Well, we'll take a couple questions if there are any from the audience. We've got some microphone runners. Anyone brave enough to ask a question? Oh, I have to give my microphone up.
I have the microphone. Anybody have a question?
Hello. Oh, sorry. Sorry. My name is Tiu. I'm a product manager at Zelta. I'm interested in thinking about what is appropriate when, it seems like you're all very pro agentic AI. What about data entry, right? We're starting to move towards to the danger zone of sites and data entry. What are your thoughts about that?
I can start from a tactical. So I think we're not there yet. If we're talking about registrational level data, there's still the necessary processes that we've done for many years now. But what I'm hoping is that we are starting to undo that. It can be qualified with a query that's run on an agent. It doesn't take a CRA physically going into the practice and asking questions around how did we get to this data point. So I see that coming, but I don't think we have yet seen that happen just yet. I think there could be some risk with. There's a fear factor that it prevents some of this evolution, right? And there could be this inherent risk of an agent did this or agent did that, and the data point or the data entry is therefore compromised. However, think about what's happening today. Tired people, I can say myself as a coordinator, transcribing manually and entering in data that would be used for a pivotal trial. And yes, therefore it should be checked, but manually checked, and then having to have a conversation or a physical meeting about the queries that came up, which could have been easily answered if you looked across the queries and said there's a pattern here. So I would say that the risk is not as big as some may fear. I don't see the FDA also saying this isn't something we can't evolve to. So I think we have to think about, if that was how your question was framed, around the risk and the data entry of pivotal trials starting to leverage the space. I think it should.
Yeah, and it's not exactly what you asked, but I'm going to partner it to what you said, Noelle. Other ways that we can have AI augment that. So if you think about some of the assessments in specific therapeutic areas that a clinician might conduct in extracting information from the patient, we're actually experimenting with algorithms now that can check in the compliance of, did they go through the assessment correctly? Was it performed correctly to extract the right information from the patient in the first place, as opposed to that being something where we, don't find out that perhaps that clinician wasn't trained well and wasn't conducting the assessment appropriately. So I think it's double-edged in the sense that I agree. There's a lot of places you get the same analogy back with self-driving cars, where it's like, well, every once in a while they have an accident, but how many accidents are we having evolving every day just in our own driving. Like, yes, every once in a while, or we may have some levels of risk that we have to mitigate for, but that's not saying that humans are flawless either. But at the same time, we also have things that we could do to check on the human data entry too. And so I think it's a really interesting space that's expanding.
Catherine took my microphone away. Thank you all for coming. I want to thank my panelists, very smart people, and I enjoyed chatting. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this conversation and find any of us afterwards for more questions. Thank you. Please join me. Thank you.